The Zarkan Dominion had ruled the galaxy for centuries. They were the strongest, the most ruthless, and the most feared. Many species had tried to resist them, but all had failed. The Zarkans crushed their enemies without mercy. To them, strength was everything, and weakness was a crime. Then they discovered Earth. At first, they didn't pay much attention. Humanity was polite, diplomatic, and peaceful. They sent envoys, followed galactic laws, and never acted aggressively. To the Zarkans, this was a clear sign of weakness. A species too afraid to fight was no threat at all. The first warning came when the Zarkan Dominion started expanding near human space. Earth's representatives sent a message to the High Command. The words were calm but firm. "We respect peace, but do not mistake our kindness for weakness." The Zarkans laughed. They had heard similar warnings from weaker species before. It always ended the same way. The weak begged for mercy, and the Dominion took what they wanted. Ignoring the warning, the Zarkans sent a fleet to Colony Omega-7, one of Earth's outer settlements. The colony was small, home to a few million humans, mostly scientists and engineers. It had no heavy weapons, no warships, no defenses. It was an easy target. The Zarkan fleet arrived in orbit, broadcasting their demand. "Surrender your colony and swear loyalty to the Dominion, or be destroyed." The humans responded calmly. "Leave now. This is your final warning." Final warning. The Zarkan commander smirked. How could a weak, weaponless species give a final warning? The humans were clearly stalling for time, hoping for a miracle. But the Dominion did not believe in miracles. They believed in power. To show their strength, they bombarded a small section of the colony. Explosions turned buildings into fire and ash. Thousands died in an instant. The humans still did not beg. They simply sent a message back. "You will regret this." The Zarkan commander didn't care. The humans were fools. They had no army, no fleets, no way to fight back. There was nothing to regret. But far away, on Earth, something changed. The attack was broadcast across the planet. Every screen, every device, every city saw the destruction of Omega-7. For a moment, there was silence. No one spoke. No one moved. The entire planet held its breath. Then, the silence broke. A single message was sent to every military base, every warship, every hidden installation. It contained just 3 words. Politeness is over. Deep beneath the surface of the moon, great doors opened for the first time in history. Warships, black as the void, began to rise. They had no markings, no names, no identification. They were ghosts, ships that did not officially exist, ships that had been waiting for this moment. On Mars, classified research stations activated. Advanced weapons, thought to be only myths, were loaded onto strike teams. Soldiers, trained for battles the galaxy had never seen, prepared for war. Humanity had always been polite. They had always chosen diplomacy first. But now, that choice was gone. And the galaxy's strongest empire was about to learn the truth. The Zarkan Dominion had made a mistake they could never take back. They had watched humanity for years, thinking they were weak. They had ignored the warnings, believing them to be empty threats. They had attacked a peaceful colony, expecting Earth to surrender. They were wrong. For centuries, humanity had hidden its true strength. They had watched the galaxy, studying its wars, learning its secrets. The other species had seen only their diplomacy, their kindness, their patience. But now, that mask was coming off. In the deep silence of space, something moved. Near the orbit of Mars, a station that did not officially exist flickered to life. It had no name, no record in any database, but those who worked there called it the Black Vault. It was the heart of Earth's secret military projects. Inside, a group of officers stood before a massive screen. The footage of Omega-7's destruction played in a loop. None of them spoke. None of them needed to. They all knew what had to be done. A single command was sent through encrypted channels. All across the solar system, hidden warships powered up. Unlike the bulky, outdated ships the galaxy had seen before, these vessels were something else entirely. They were built in secret, designed for war that no one had expected. They didn't rely on brute strength like the Zarkans. They relied on something far more dangerous: precision. At that same moment on Earth, the United Military Council gathered. The highest-ranking generals, admirals, and intelligence officers sat in a dark room, watching the same footage. The Supreme Commander of Earth's forces stood at the head of the table, eyes cold, voice steady. "We gave them a chance. Now we show them who we really are." The operation was set in motion. The first step was information. Before the Zarkans could react, every Dominion system near human space was compromised. Their defense codes, fleet movements, and classified communications were now in Earth's hands. They didn't even realize they had been hacked. The second step was psychological warfare. The Zarkan fleet that had attacked Omega-7 remained in orbit, waiting for new orders. The commander, still confident in his victory, sat in his command chair, unaware that his fate had already been sealed. Then the lights on his bridge flickered. It was a small thing, a simple glitch, nothing to worry about. Until the alarm started. Weapons systems went offline. Shields dropped to zero. Engines refused to respond. The crew panicked, trying to restore control. Then a single message appeared on every screen, every terminal, every communication device on the ship. "We are here." And then, one by one, the ships began to disappear. There were no explosions, no battles, no warning. One moment, the ships were there. The next, they were gone, swallowed by the darkness. The Zarkan commander watched in horror as his fleet vanished around him. He shouted orders, demanded answers, but none came. Then the lights on his bridge went out completely. In the darkness, a voice whispered through the speakers. It was calm, too calm. "You pushed us too far." And then silence. The Zarkan Dominion did not know it yet, but war had already begun. And for the first time in history, they were the ones who would learn what fear truly meant. The Zarkan High Command was in chaos. Their fleet had vanished, not destroyed, not damaged, vanished. The battle reports made no sense. There were no signs of enemy weapons, no explosions, no wreckage, just silence. One moment, their warships were in formation. The next, they were gone, wiped from existence. It was impossible. And yet, it had happened. In the Great War Hall of the Zarkan Dominion, the Supreme Commander stood before a massive holographic display, surrounded by his top generals. The room, once filled with the confidence of an empire that had never known defeat, was now drowning in fear. "How did this happen?" he demanded. His voice was sharp, filled with frustration. No one had an answer. Across the galaxy, Zarkan fleets were mobilizing. They did not know what they were facing, but their pride refused to let them hesitate. They would gather their might, find Earth's forces, and crush them before this war could even begin. That was the plan. But humanity had already planned far ahead. In the darkness of space, beyond the range of Zarkan scanners, the Ghost Fleet watched. It was Earth's true military force, hidden from the galaxy for centuries. Their ships did not reflect light, did not emit energy signals, and did not appear on any known detection systems. They were the result of years of silent preparation. Now, they would be unleashed. The first strike came without warning. A massive Zarkan supply convoy, escorted by 20 heavily armed warships, was on its way to reinforce the Dominion's borders. The fleet moved with confidence, scanning for threats. But they never saw what hit them. Without a single shot fired, the Zarkan warships lost control. Their navigation systems failed. Their engines shut down. The crew ran to their stations, screaming reports of complete system failure. And then, the darkness came. One by one, the ships went silent. No distress signals. No communications. Just silence. On the Zarkan homeworld, the High Command received no response from the fleet. Their forces were disappearing, and they had no idea how or why. Panic began to spread. Meanwhile, Earth's strike teams moved deeper into enemy space. They didn't attack like the Zarkans, with brute force and overwhelming numbers. They hunted their enemy. They disabled weapons. They hijacked communication networks. They turned Zarkan ships against their own people. On a distant Zarkan-controlled world, the governor of a key military stronghold received a transmission. The screen flickered, static filling the air. Then, a message appeared in perfect Zarkonian script. You thought we were weak. You thought we were afraid. You were wrong. Then, the planetary shields fell. Explosions erupted across the stronghold as human operatives, already inside the city, struck from within. The planet, once a symbol of Zarkan dominance, fell in a single night. Across the Dominion, fear took root. The Zarkans had fought many wars, but never like this. Their enemies had always been predictable. But now, they faced an enemy that did not fight on their terms. Humanity was not here for war. They were here for victory. And the Zarkan Dominion was starting to realize they had already lost. The Zarkan Dominion was collapsing, and they didn't even understand how. Their fleets were missing. Their supply lines were gone. Their greatest strongholds had fallen without a single full-scale battle. The Dominion's war machine had been the most feared in the galaxy for centuries, but now it was bleeding from 1,000 unseen wounds. Desperation filled the Great War Hall on the Zarkan homeworld. The Supreme Commander stood at the center, his claws digging into the metal table as he glared at the reports before him. Every hour, new information arrived, and each update was worse than the last. Entire fleets wiped from existence. Weapons and shields disabled mid-battle. Planetary defenses hacked before a single enemy ship even arrived. "This is not war," one of the generals roared. "This is witchcraft. How are they doing this?" No one had an answer. And that was the problem. The Zarkan Dominion had fought many enemies before. They had crushed weak, primitive species. They had battled great empires. They had survived long and bloody wars. But they had never faced something they could not see, could not fight, could not even understand. Humanity was not engaging in war. They were hunting. Deep within the void of space, beyond the reach of Zarkan sensors, a fleet moved in perfect silence. It was invisible to all known forms of detection. No heat signatures, no energy pulses, no radio signals. It was a ghost fleet, and it belonged to Earth. At the center of the formation was the command ship, Eclipse 1. Inside, Admiral Rain stood on the bridge, watching the latest reports with calm, calculating eyes. "We take the head," she said. "Tonight." No one questioned her. The operation had already been set in motion. The target, the Zarkan High Command itself. Back on the Zarkan homeworld, alarms blared across the capital city. Citizens looked up to the night sky in confusion. There were no enemy ships, no explosions, but the security systems had detected something. Inside the war hall, the Supreme Commander growled, slamming his fist on the table. What now? The screens in front of him glitched. Static filled the air. The lights flickered. The emergency power core, one of the most secure systems in the Dominion, shut down. And then the voice came. It was not loud. It was not angry. It was calm, controlled. "You lost the moment you attacked us." The Supreme Commander froze. The voice was not coming from a communication channel. It was coming from inside their own security system. One of the generals shouted, "Trace it. Find out where." His words were cut off as the doors to the war hall slammed shut. All across the city, defense systems failed. Anti-air turrets powered down. Security barriers collapsed. The once impenetrable palace of the Dominion's rulers was now open and defenseless. The Supreme Commander turned, his heart pounding. "They're here." The lights went out. For the first time in his life, the ruler of the galaxy's strongest empire felt fear. And in the darkness, humanity made its final move. The war was ending. The Zarkan Dominion just didn't know it yet. The supreme commander of the Zarkan Dominion had never known fear, until now. The lights were out. The war hall, the most secure place in the empire, was silent except for the rapid breathing of his generals. Outside, the capital city was in chaos, its defense systems failing one by one. And the worst part, there was still no sign of the enemy. No warships in orbit, no soldiers storming the palace, no explosions or gunfire, just silence. The Zarkan Dominion had spent centuries perfecting war. They had fought enemies who threw massive armies at them, who launched fleets of warships in desperate battles. But this was different. Humanity didn't fight like the others. They didn't fight at all. They took. The Supreme Commander forced himself to stand tall. Get me a direct line to. A sudden hiss filled the air. The holographic table in front of him flickered, the data streams corrupting, twisting into something else. A message. It was written in perfect Zarkonian script, but the words were unmistakably human. You never saw us as a threat. That was your first mistake. A second message followed. You thought we would beg. That was your second. The room grew colder. A dark presence had settled over the war hall. Something unseen, something unstoppable. The Zarkan generals, the most powerful warriors in the Dominion, stood frozen, waiting for something, anything, to happen. The Supreme Commander clenched his fists. His empire was burning around him, and he still didn't understand how. Then the final message appeared. Your third mistake. You thought you were the hunters, but you were always the prey. The emergency doors slammed open, not with an explosion, not with a military assault. They simply opened. A figure stood in the doorway. Not Zarkan, not alien, human. One man, alone, wearing a dark, unmarked combat suit. No visible weapons, no armor. And yet, the moment he stepped inside, every general in the room took a step back. The Supreme Commander growled, "Kill him." The closest general pulled his plasma blade and lunged, and collapsed mid-strike. No sound, no struggle. 1 second, he was attacking. The next, he was on the ground, unconscious. The other generals hesitated. The human smiled. Not a grin of arrogance, not the snarl of a warrior. It was worse. It was a smile of someone who knew he had already won. The Supreme Commander's voice was a low, dangerous growl. "Who are you?" The human took a step forward. The Zarkan soldiers raised their weapons, but none of them fired. They didn't dare. "Who am I?" The human echoed, his voice calm. "I'm no one special, just someone who came to deliver a message." His gaze locked onto the Supreme Commander. "It's over." The Supreme Commander bared his teeth. "You think taking my city means you've won? We still have fleets." The human tilted his head. "Do you?" The Supreme Commander froze. The human pressed something on his wrist. The holographic display in the war hall changed. Real-time footage appeared. The Zarkan fleets, the great warships of the Dominion, the pride of the Empire, the unstoppable force that had ruled the galaxy for generations. They were gone. Empty, lifeless. Hundreds of warships floating dead in space. Not destroyed, not damaged, just disabled. All across the Zarkan Dominion, ships had been hijacked, systems shut down, soldiers rendered unconscious before they could even react. The Empire had lost the war before they even realized it had begun. The Supreme Commander's breath came in slow, heavy bursts. "How?" The human gave him a small, almost pitying look. "Because while you spent centuries making war, we spent centuries making something better." He turned toward the exit. "You don't rule the galaxy anymore." The Supreme Commander took a step forward, claws flexing. "We are Zarkan. We do not surrender." The human stopped in the doorway, looking over his shoulder. Then don't. He tapped his wrist again. The lights in the war hall flickered, and every single Zarkan general collapsed. No struggle, no fight, no pain, just darkness. The Supreme Commander staggered. His mind swam. His body refused to move. His vision blurred, collapsing into a deep, empty void. The last thing he heard before everything faded was the human's voice. Soft, calm, final. Good night. And then, the galaxy's strongest empire fell into silence. The Zarkan Dominion had ruled the galaxy for centuries. They had crushed civilizations, expanded their empire, and believed themselves to be invincible. But now, their empire was dying, not in fire, not in battle, but in silence. Across their homeworld, nothing functioned. Defense grids were offline. Warships hung motionless in space. Every attempt to send distress signals failed. High-ranking officials had vanished. Their own security systems turned against them. The Supreme Commander sat alone in the darkened war hall. The once mighty room, filled with the voices of warlords and conquerors, was silent. His generals lay scattered across the floor, unconscious, the Empire's greatest minds, defeated without a fight. He was the last one left. And he couldn't even move. Something had invaded his body, something invisible, something terrifying. He could feel it crawling through his veins, shutting down his strength, his will. His muscles refused to obey him. His mind, once sharp and ruthless, felt clouded. Then a footstep. Soft, controlled, human. The same man who had entered before now stood over him, looking down with an expression that was not angry, not vengeful, just calm. "You look tired," the human said. His voice was steady, unshaken, as if he was merely speaking to an old acquaintance. The Supreme Commander growled, his jaw barely able to move. What did you do?" The human crouched beside him. "We ended this war before it began. You just didn't notice." The Supreme Commander's mind reeled. How? How had they done it? How had a race that was once seen as weak completely overturned the most powerful force in the galaxy? The human studied him for a moment. "Let me guess. You're still trying to understand." The Supreme Commander tried to speak, but his throat tightened. "You believed strength was about numbers, weapons, territory." The human leaned closer. "That was your mistake. We don't fight for land, for resources, for conquest. We fight to win. And we win before the battle even starts." He gestured around the darkened war hall. "Every system in your empire is compromised. Every fleet is under our control. Your communications, your supply chains, your leadership, gone. Your people don't even know who's in charge anymore. Some are already surrendering, others are hiding. Your empire is breaking apart from the inside, and there's nothing you can do to stop it." The Supreme Commander's mind screamed in denial, but the evidence was everywhere. His people, the most feared species in the galaxy, had been conquered without a single large-scale battle. It wasn't just defeat. It was humiliation. The human stood up, looking down at him. "I could end you right now. That would be easy. But we're not like you. We don't slaughter for power." He tapped a device on his wrist. The Supreme Commander's body unlocked. The invisible force holding him down released its grip, and he gasped, sucking in deep breaths. Shame burned in his chest. The human turned to leave. "Your empire is done. The Zarkan Dominion is no longer a threat to anyone." He stopped at the doorway, glancing back one last time. "You will remember this night, and so will the galaxy." With that, the human walked away. The Supreme Commander, the ruler of the once mighty Zarkan Dominion, did not move. He did not speak. He simply stared into the darkness. And for the first time in his life, he understood what it meant to be powerless. The galaxy changed overnight. The Zarkan Dominion, once the most feared empire in the known universe, had fallen without a single major battle. No burning fleets, no drawn-out war, no grand last stand. The collapse was silent, precise, absolute. Their warships dead in space. Their generals neutralized. Their supreme commander humiliated and helpless. Other alien civilizations watched in stunned silence. They had seen the Zarkans conquer countless worlds, destroy entire species, and reign as undisputed rulers of war. Yet now, they were nothing. And at the center of it all stood humanity. No one had considered them a threat before. To most of the galaxy, Earth was just another backwater world, a minor species with no grand fleets, no ancient warlords, no legendary conquests. The Zarkans had believed the same, and that belief had doomed them. Because when the humans finally acted, they did not march armies. They did not engage in long wars. They simply removed their enemy from the equation. Now, the Zarkan homeworld was a shadow of what it had been. The Great War Hall, once filled with the echoes of conquest, was silent. Its leaders had either disappeared or surrendered. And deep inside that once mighty hall, the Supreme Commander sat alone. His empire was gone. His people directionless. His fleet useless. All because of a species they had underestimated. A soft chime broke the silence. The massive holographic display in front of him flickered to life. The Supreme Commander did not look up. He already knew who it was. A human. The same man who had walked into this chamber the night before, unarmed and unafraid. The one who had left, knowing the war was already over. The human studied him through the holographic feed. "You haven't said a word in hours." The Supreme Commander did not respond. He had nothing left to say. The human tilted his head. "You know, we didn't want this war. We warned you, gave you every chance to turn back." He leaned closer, his gaze unshaken. "But you didn't listen." A long silence followed. The Supreme Commander's claws twitched. A lifetime of instinct told him to fight back, resist, strike out. But what was the point? The fight was already lost. The human sighed. "So what now?" The Supreme Commander's voice was barely a whisper. "What do you want?" The human smiled, not in triumph, not in mockery. Just calm certainty. "Nothing." The Supreme Commander's brow furrowed. "You think we're here to rule you, to take your worlds, to break you." The human shook his head. "No, that's your way, not ours." The Supreme Commander finally looked up, eyes filled with disbelief. "You won't take our empire." The human gave a small shrug. "We don't need it. We never did. We just needed you to understand." He tapped a command on his screen. Across the Zarkan homeworld, power systems came back online. The darkened cities flickered with light. The lockdown networks reopened. And across the Dominion, stunned Zarkans realized their fleet controls had been returned to them. But they also realized something else. They were no longer feared, no longer invincible. The galaxy had seen them fall. And in their place, a new power had risen. One that did not need war to win. One that did not conquer with destruction. Humanity had proven its strength not by taking over the galaxy, but by showing they could if they wanted to. The Supreme Commander felt something he had never experienced before. Not rage, not defiance, shame. The human's voice broke through his thoughts one last time. "You pushed us too far." His tone was quiet, final. "Don't make that mistake again." And with that, the transmission ended. The Supreme Commander sat in the silence of his ruined war room, staring at the dark screen. His empire still existed. His people still breathed. But everything had changed. Because now, the galaxy no longer feared the Zarkan Dominion. Now, they feared Earth.